Okay, let's unpack this. For years, we've all heard the drumbeat, right? This narrative of demographic doom, aging populations, plummeting birth rates, and this looming shadow of economic collapse. It paints a pretty bleak picture.
It really does. It suggests nations are going to be burdened by, too many retirees and not enough young workers.
Exactly. But what if those fears? What if they're largely unfounded? Or maybe even fundamentally misleading?
Well, that's what's so interesting. It is a powerful and, frankly, pervasive narrative.
Yeah.
But it's often rooted in a, shall we say, rather simplified view of how complex economies and societies actually function.
Right.
So this deep dive is all about a really groundbreaking paper. It's by Corey J. Bradshaw and Shanna M. McDermott.
Okay.
And it unveils a surprising and I would say profoundly hopeful counter-narrative.
A counter-narrative. I like the sound of that. So what did they find?
Well, they did this exhaustive global study. They meticulously examined 9 crucial socioeconomic indicators across a huge range of countries.
9 indicators. Okay.
And they found no evidence, really, zero, that slower population growth or an aging demographic inevitably leads to worse economic or social outcomes.
No evidence. Seriously?
None. In fact, for most of the measures they looked at, the exact opposite turned out to be true.
Wow. Okay, so opposite how?
Essentially, you see countries with older or maybe slower growing populations frequently performing better.
In what ways?
In areas we really value, like overall national wealth, the fairness of income distribution, and crucially, how many years people live in good health.
So this fundamentally challenges pretty much everything you might assume about demographics and national prosperity.
It really does. It forces a rethink.
So what does this all mean for us? For how we view the future of our societies? Get ready, because it seems like we need to completely rethink what it means to live in a graying world. We're about to explore why quality, adaptability, maybe wise investment, not just sheer headcount, are the real measures of national success. Okay, let's set the stage first with the conventional wisdom.
Right.
The story that grabs headlines, shapes policy debates.
Right, the standard narrative.
Yeah, it's the fear that a shrinking or aging population means fewer working-age adults, right? They have to support this growing number of retirees.
Which supposedly leads to lower national productivity, a dip in GDP, and ultimately a slide in living standards.
Exactly. And on the surface, it sounds quite logical, doesn't it?
It absolutely does sound logical, but that's where the simplification really kicks in.
How so?
Well, if we look at fundamental economic models, like think back to Ramsey and Solow, those pioneers, they actually highlight something different.
Okay.
What truly drives long-term economic well-being isn't just the sheer number of people, it's more about the amount of capital and knowledge each person possesses.
Ah, right. The per capita stuff.
Precisely. And the rate of technological progress. So, think about it. If a smaller population is better educated, healthier, and has more advanced technology and infrastructure per person,
it could actually be way more productive than a larger, maybe less invested one.
Exactly. It's about the quality and resources available to each individual.
And this is where the paper really starts peeling back the layers, I suppose. It points out that GDP itself, while we use it all the time, it could be a pretty blunt measure.
Oh, definitely. It's great for tracking market-based activity, sure.
All right.
But it often completely overlooks critical factors that really contribute to a good life. Things like income equality, the huge environmental costs of endless growth,
The value of unpaid labor in community.
the impacts on future generations. Yeah. GDP kind of treats every expense as a positive, whether it's genuinely improving well-being or just fixing a problem growth itself caused. It's definitely not a perfect proxy for overall societal health.
That's a great point.
And even the more advanced modern economic models, the dynamic, stochastic, general equilibrium ones, they suggest that while population changes can affect the total output of an economy, they don't necessarily dictate the long-run growth rate.
Which, as you said, is driven more by tech and human capital.
Right, so the critical takeaway is this. If a country keeps investing in its capital and knowledge per person, and those don't decline, then per capita output, what each individual actually has and earns, can stay stable or even increase, even with a smaller population.
So population decline doesn't automatically equal economic decline.
Not at all. It's much more about how societies adapt, how they invest, how they share resources and skills.
But this deep nuance, it just seems to get lost in the public and political discussions, doesn't it? It gets boiled down to that catchy but often misleading soundbite. more people automatically mean more growth.
And that oversimplification has real consequences. It directly translates into policy. You mentioned it earlier, we saw as many as 55 countries actively trying to boost birth rates by 2019.
Oh, 55.
Yeah, driven by these potentially flawed assumptions.
Yeah.
The public debate often fixates on, the fiscal pressures of aging, the pension costs.
Yep.
But these alarmist narratives frequently overshadow this growing body of evidence, which this paper strongly supports, that smaller or slower growing populations can actually bring significant advantages: economic, well-being, environmental advantages.
Okay, so with that really crucial context set, how did the researchers, Bradshaw and McDermott, actually test these deep-seated beliefs globally? How do they put this conventional wisdom under the microscope?
They approached it very methodically. They set up two main hypotheses to really rigorously examine the situation.
Okay, hypothesis one.
First, they wanted to see if there was a direct, clear link between a nation's socio-economic performance and its overall population trends.
Right.
If declining populations were truly the disaster they're often made out to be, they expected to see key indicators of national well-being, wealth, health, equality, etc., consistently decline as population growth slowed down.
Makes sense. And the second hypothesis?
The second one focused specifically on age structure, particularly on what we call the dependency ratio.
Yes, the dependency ratio. How did they define that here?
In their study, it was the number of people aged 65 or older compared to those in the traditional working age bracket, which they set at 16 to 64.
Got it.
And the conventional wisdom, as you know, predicts that a higher proportion of older folks, basically an aging population, would inevitably be an economic burden. It would lead to a noticeable decline in socioeconomic performance. They wanted to see if the data actually backed that up.
So how did they get the data for this massive global analysis?
They didn't just grab any numbers. They used comprehensive, really robust data sets from highly reputable sources. Think the UN, the World Bank, Transparency International, the World Health Organization.
Okay, solid sources.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And crucially, they weren't just looking at GDP. That's key. They widened their lens significantly. They incorporated 9 different indices.
9, to get a more holistic picture.
Exactly. A truly nuanced picture of national well-being. It was a vital step to move beyond just relying on GDP as the sole measure of success.
Can you give us a quick rundown of those 9 indices? What were they looking at?
Sure. They were carefully chosen. First, the Domestic Comprehensive Wealth Index. This is much broader than GDP. It includes human capital like skills and education,
Okay.
natural capital, and produced capital. Then, the Gini Coefficient, the standard measure for income equality. Lower Gini means more equality.
Right.
Then, 3 distinct productivity measures. Gross R&D expenditure as a percentage of GDP showing innovation and investment, per capita patent applications indicating inventive output, and the Human Capital Index, which looks at schooling quality and quantity and the returns on education.
So wealth, equality, productivity. What else?
They also looked at governance, the Corruption Perception Index and the Freedom Score, gauging political stability, transparency, human rights.
Important factors.
Very. And a particularly interesting one, the Planetary Pressure Adjusted Human Development Index. This is a great well-being metric that's also adjusted for a nation's environmental impact.
So acknowledging sustainability.
Exactly. Development shouldn't come at nature's expense. And finally, healthy life expectancy at birth. Basically, how many years you can expect to live in full health.
Okay, that's a comprehensive set of metrics. And how did they analyze all this global data, not just simple charts, I assume?
No, definitely not. They brought in some pretty sophisticated analytical tools, advanced machine learning techniques, specifically something called boosted regression trees.
Boosted regression trees. Sounds complex.
Well, you can think of them as super smart detective programs. They're capable of finding complex, often hidden, nonlinear relationships and intricate interactions within these huge data sets.
Yeah.
It lets them uncover patterns without needing to assume specific shapes for those relationships beforehand. The data speaks for itself in a way.
That's powerful.
It is. And they even used a special resampling method to account for spatial autocorrelation. Basically, making sure their findings weren't just skewed because countries are neighbors, it makes the results extremely robust.
Okay.
And crucially, they didn't just take a snapshot in time, they also did within country time series analysis.
So tracking how things changed over time within individual nations as they aged?
Exactly. That longitudinal view is really important.
All right, let's get to the really fascinating part then. the results. You said they were surprising. What did they actually discover about, say, national wealth and income equality?
Well, this is where it gets really striking. That per capita domestic comprehensive wealth index. It showed a clear and actually positive relationship with the dependency ratio.
Positive. So older populations were wealthier.
In much simpler terms, yes. Most countries with relatively older populations were, on average, also the wealthiest. The dependency ratio had a huge influence, explaining over 40% of the variation in wealth sometimes. And there was this fascinating threshold effect. Wealth increased rapidly once the dependency ratio passed a certain point, around 0.09, which is roughly 9 older people for every 100 working age folks.
Okay.
And then it sort of stabilized at a higher level around 0.16. It strongly suggests that societal maturity, not just youth, seems to be a significant contributor to national wealth.
So older populations, more wealth. That really pushes back against the whole demographic burden idea. What about income equality? That's fundamental for social well-being.
Again, counterintuitive results. For income equality, using the Gini Coefficient, countries with low or even negative population growth actually had, on average, higher income equality.
So less inequality in slower-growing older places.
That's right. Slower growing and older populations tended to exhibit less income inequality. And the rate of population change was actually the dominant predictor here. Increasing population growth rates generally correlated with higher inequality.
Suggesting maybe rapid growth strains resources or makes existing inequalities worse.
That could be one interpretation, yes?
Okay, that truly flips the script on the idea that a growing population is always good. What about productivity? Things like R&D, patents, human capital, vital for the future?
All 3 productivity indices, they looked at R&D spending, per capita patents, and the human capital index showed a strong positive relationship with the dependency ratio.
Positive again. With the dependency ratio.
Yes. Countries with older populations tend to have higher R&D expenditure, they generate more patents per person, and they boast a higher human capital index. The dependency ratio was the single most dominant predictor for these measures.
How dominant?
Often explaining over 40%, and for some, like human capital, even up to 90% of the variation they observed.
90%.
Yeah.
So you're saying an older workforce, far from being a drain, seems to be associated with more innovation, more skills, better education on a national level.
That's what the correlation strongly suggests. Experience, accumulated knowledge. These might be key drivers of progress, perhaps more so than just raw numbers of young people.
That is quite a finding. And what about the quality of governance? Corruption, basic freedoms.
We saw a strikingly similar trend there too. Corruption, measured by the index, it declined. And political freedom increased as the dependency ratio rose.
So older societies are less corrupt and more free, according to this.
Again, the dependency ratio was the strongest predictor for both, explaining a substantial chunk of the variance. It strongly suggests that older, perhaps more mature, societies tend to develop stronger institutions, become less corrupt, and more free. It implies a link between societal aging and maybe the strengthening of democratic values.
Fascinating. And finally, the things we really strive for: overall well-being and a long, healthy life. What did the study reveal there?
Well, that planetary pressure-adjusted human development index, the one that considers environmental impact.
Yeah.
It showed a significant increase with an increasing dependency ratio.
So better well-being in older populations.
Consistently. Nations with the highest proportion of older cohorts had the highest overall well-being by that measure. And healthy life expectancy. Same story, it followed suit. Older countries, indicated by higher dependency ratios, enjoyed higher average healthy life expectancy.
It's almost paradoxical, isn't it?
Yeah.
The very thing we're often told to fear an aging population seems correlated with the goals we most aspire to achieve.
It certainly challenges our assumption.
And this is where, as you mentioned, the time series analysis comes in. They didn't just look at a static snapshot. They tracked countries over time. What did that longitudinal data show? Did it back this up?
It provided powerful reinforcement for 8 out of the 9 main indicators.
8 out of 9.
Yes. The vast majority of countries actually showed better outcomes as their populations aged over time within that country's own history.
So it's not just comparing different countries, but seeing improvement within countries as they age.
Exactly. This temporal evidence strongly supports the global cross-sectional findings. It moves beyond just correlation to showing a consistent trend within individual nations as they undergo these demographic shifts.
Which was the one outlier.
Only the Corruption Perception Index showed a slight majority of countries with a worse outcome with increasing age over time, but even that was marginal compared to the overwhelmingly positive trend across the other 8 indicators.
Okay, now the paper did identify a small group, right?
Huh.
19 countries where aging seemed to correlate with worse outcomes on at least 3 indicators. What was going on there? Does that contradict the main findings?
Yeah, that's a really important nuance to address. Interestingly, when they looked closer, these 19 countries were typically fast-growing and relatively young nations.
Young and fast-growing, not old and slow-growing.
Correct. They were often clustered around the average for African nations, for example. Their mean dependency ratio and rate of population change were much closer to younger, faster-growing regions, not the older, slower-growing ones, where the positive trends were strongest.
So what does that suggest?
It suggests that their negative trends were likely driven by other existing socioeconomic and political conditions. Things like maybe instability, lack of investment, weaker institutions, rather than being a direct consequence of population aging itself.
So aging wasn't the primary driver there. Other factors were likely at play.
Exactly. It reinforces that context matters immensely. Aging isn't happening in a vacuum, and it certainly wasn't the sole or likely even primary driver of negative outcomes in those specific cases.
Okay, so let's try to pull all this together. This study seems to provide a really robust, evidence-based counterargument to that widely held idea that aging or declining populations are inherently bad for a country. It's quite a powerful reframing, isn't it?
Absolutely. The findings strongly suggest that these populations, on average, actually have higher socioeconomic performance indicators across a broad range of measures.
Higher performance.
Yeah. This result powerfully supports the mounting evidence that smaller or maybe slower growing populations can be immensely beneficial to society. It stands in sharp contrast to a lot of the, frankly, unsubstantiated political rhetoric we often hear about an impending economic Armageddon.
Right. It fundamentally shifts the focus then. Instead of, panicking about a baby bust or trying to artificially inflate birth rates, we should perhaps be looking at entirely different factors to ensure national prosperity and well-being.
Precisely. The paper really highlights that the real imperative lies in investing intelligently. We need to focus on the health, the training, the education of all workers.
All workers.
Especially valuing and integrating older, more experienced individuals, because that directly increases human capital and productivity per person.
And what about the common cry of labor shortages due to fewer people?
Well, the authors argue that's often more a symptom of inadequate, maybe restrictive immigration policies that limit or deny the movement of capable, working-age people.
Rather than an absolute lack of suitable workers globally.
Exactly. It reframes it from a sheer numbers problem to potentially a policy and distribution problem.
It's a vital distinction. And they also point out that the dependency ratio itself, while it's a useful metric, might be a bit conservative, potentially overstating the burden.
Indeed. The traditional way it's calculated often doesn't fully account for several key factors that are changing rapidly.
Like what?
Like, for example, the increasing workforce participation of people over 65. People are healthier, living longer, many want to keep contributing.
Sure.
Also, the significant economic contributions of volunteering in older age that supports communities in ways GDP doesn't measure. And on the other side of the equation, the substantial cost savings associated with having fewer children in aging populations.
Right, fewer dependents at the younger end.
Exactly. So when you factor those things in, the perceived burden of an aging population is frequently overstated in conventional analyses.
So, okay, demographic shifts are undoubtedly a challenge. They require careful management. But the paper suggests these challenges are fundamentally manageable, not catastrophic.
Yes, absolutely. With the right strategic adjustments, greater investment in education, not just for the young, but throughout the lifespan that can enlarge and upskill the effective workforce.
Lifelong learning.
Precisely. Adjusting and delaying retirement ages, recognizing that many people can and wish to work longer, that promotes higher income tax revenues and continued productivity.
Makes sense.
Redesigning pension financing to be more sustainable under different demographic profiles. These are all realistic, implementable adjustments.
And particularly feasible where?
Well, interestingly, these reforms are often most feasible and effective in countries with strong institutions and low corruption, which happen to be the very countries where population aging is often most pronounced.
So the capacity to adapt might be highest where the demographic shift is most apparent.
It seems that way. Even other economic analyses that might note profound implications from aging often concede that the transition to older societies is ultimately manageable with structural reforms, continued technological advances, and sensible debt strategies.
This research also feels very connected to some broader ideas floating around, like those from the degrowth movement, maybe. The idea that genuine well-being and long-term sustainability don't actually require endlessly expanding GDP.
It absolutely does resonate with that. This research provides powerful empirical backing for the idea that slower or even negative population growth doesn't have to trigger severe economic contractions if we prioritize capital per person and maintain strong productivity.
Right.
It implies a potential shift in our goals. Maybe the focus should be on adapting our economic and social systems to truly thrive under diverse population trajectories, prioritizing per capita prosperity, equity, environmental quality.
Rather than just fixating on aggregate population size or raw GDP growth.
Exactly. This paper basically shows that an older population can, in fact, be a richer, more equitable, and more innovative one. The sky isn't falling.
Wow. What an eye-opening deep dive. It genuinely makes you question some of the foundational narratives we've just accepted about population and prosperity for so long. It feels like a truly paradigm-shifting study.
It truly does. It encourages all of us to look beyond those simplistic correlations and really appreciate the incredibly complex, dynamic interplay of human capital, technology, and thoughtful social investment.
Yeah.
It's about understanding that quality, not just quantity, seems to be what truly determines a nation's strength and its people's well-being.
So this study isn't necessarily saying population should decline, is it? But rather it's demonstrating that if it does, or if it slows down, it's certainly not the economic apocalypse that's so often predicted.
Precisely.
In fact, it might just be the door opening to potentially wealthier, happier, and healthier societies for everyone.
And maybe this raises an important question for you, the listener, to consider. If we as a society were to truly prioritize things like per capita well-being, sustainability, and equity over just the singular pursuit of aggregate GDP growth, how might our national and global policies need to fundamentally shift? How could we learn to embrace, rather than fear, an older or slower growing population? What opportunities might we actually unlock if we changed our perspective?
That is definitely food for thought, something to really mull over. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the fascinating and clearly often misunderstood world of demographics and economics.